Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Nick Orlov and welcome to CE Chat. We are graciously hosted on Cloud OnAir, and today we are going to be talking about a super exciting subject, startups. So here with me is Jason. Jason on the startup team. You want to introduce yourself real quick, Jason?
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Jason Scott. I'm the startup program lead for the West Coast here on Google Cloud.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jason. It's always great to have other teammates, other Googlers joining us. We have a special surprise in that later this episode, we actually have a customer, LiftIgniter, who's going to be jumping in and talking about their experience with the startup program. But Jason, startups are an exciting breed. I mean, they're lightning fast. They make changes on a dime. They're hypersensitive to costs, and they want to be on the bleeding edge. So I'm just curious, I didn't really know that GCP had a startup program until quite recently. So what is the startup program and what is it that you do?
Yeah, so the startup program, I would say there are kind of three big ways that we support startups. I would say the first is access. So as you know, access to product, whether those be cloud products or Firebase or Maps APIs if they're doing cool things with Maps, or just even access to resources and technical resources as well. So we do a lot of technical office hours, one-on-one architecture reviews, things like that for startups. But I would say one of the biggest things that we provide is just the community. So we love connecting startups that are building things on GCP and connecting them to the outside community. So here on the West Coast, I love connecting startups to partners that we have in the ecosystem. So accelerators and VCs, as well as just Googlers who are really passionate about working with startups.
That's cool. I mean, it's basically all about who you know sometimes in the startup world. So if Google's able to help me get connected or help my startup get connected with Googlers and partners and VCs and all that, that's really awesome. So just why should a startup kind of consider going with maybe the GCP startup program as opposed to kind of like jumping in on their own without the GCP program or anything like that?
Yeah, fundamentally, I would say Googlers just love startups, and Google, I think, fundamentally also loves startups. And I think whether it be through our commitment to open source, and you see that with Kubernetes and with TensorFlow, but also through just a lot of our activities that we do as a whole, we really believe in kind of the one Google. And I am always pleasantly surprised when I'm able to do an event, and I not just have people at Cloud, but have people come in from other teams across Google to also support startups. And I think Google is one of those few places where you can do that, where you actually have people that are helping startups with all of their infrastructure and all of their products throughout their business model and throughout their stages of growth.
That's true. I mean, Google Cloud is obviously one aspect of maybe hosting your application, running your application somewhere in the cloud. But there's a lot of other aspects, for instance, like the advertising and the Google search and all that,
exactly,
which I feel like a startup probably needs some guidance on or could definitely use some guidance on. So
for sure. I mean, it's overwhelming. You can imagine being that one person kind of getting your company off the ground. And it's really nice to have a centralized resource, I would say. And I love that part of my job and being able to be that centralized resource for a founder or a developer that's looking to get something off the ground.
That's cool. That's cool. So I know that you're based out of the West Coast, but startups aren't just based out of the West Coast. There's a lot of them out of the San Francisco Bay, but they're all across the world. So do we have a startup program, like resources to help them across the US, across the world, stuff like that?
For sure. So I have counterparts across the world, and we are covering startups anywhere. If you're a developer or a startup on any continent, we have someone that could be a resource for you, and we have Googlers who could be a resource for you. We also do a lot of things digitally, so you're able, once you're in our program, to sign up for digital office hours and things like that as well. So if you are in a really remote location, we try our best to get you those resources and get you access to that. But yeah, no matter where you are, hopefully we can help. So yeah.
That's cool. And I've definitely helped with some of these office hours in the past, so it's always exciting to get engaged with a startup, find out how they're using some product on the absolute bleeding edge, maybe something that we didn't even think about for one of our products, machine learning or big data or cloud functions or really anything. But it's definitely exciting to sit down with a customer and kind of help guide them on maybe some best practices, lessons learned, stuff like that. So cool. And I guess this is kind of a biased question because we're Google, but I just have to ask, so why GCP for startups?
Why GCP for startups? I mean, I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I think we really are kind of made to grow with the startup. And I would say, like, even our program is designed for, we have a pre-program option for people who are just getting started and thinking about, do they have an idea? And that gives you a little bit of credits, a little bit of product support to really just kind of play, I would say, with our products. And then we grow with you. And I think we're really set up to do that through all of our stages of our program, from start to spark to surge. And once you get to surge, and we'll hear a little bit from LiftIgniter later, there's also a lot of opportunities to just get your name out there and kind of do things like this, be in front and pitch your startup and talk about your startup to a broader audience. So I think we're able to really grow with you, both infrastructurally, but then also as a founder, which I think is something we believe really fundamentally in.
Cool. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And then I guess final question while we have you here is, what kind of success stories do you have that you can share about startups on GCP?
So many. Where do I start? I mean, everyone knows kind of the Snapchat story, so I won't start there. But I meet founders every single day that are doing really cool things, from leveraging machine learning to better diagnose patients with chronically ill diseases, all the way to also leveraging our vision APIs to better diagnose diseased crops and help farmers. To fun things, there's a not that those weren't fun, but to fun things such as using Firebase to help users that aren't technical build apps that are native on both iOS and Android. I think you just encounter everything. And I'm excited to hear from LiftIgniter how they're leveraging our products. But every day I hear a new exciting kind of idea that a developer or founder is doing in the way that they're leveraging our products to do that.
Yeah, and you touched on something really important, I think, is that Google Cloud will grow with you. And you highlighted Snapchat. I mean, Snapchat at one point was a startup. Maybe you could argue that it still is a startup, maybe. But yeah, when they first started with Google, they were much smaller than they are today, obviously. But yeah, we scaled with them, and now they're able to host their application on us. And so it's really fantastic.
Yeah, that's
cool.
awesome.
Well, I really believe that the proof is in the pudding, and that actually talking to a startup kind of proves our point, and we can get some really good nuggets of information and knowledge from them. So, Jason, I'd like to thank you for joining us on this CE chat. And then as we kind of transition to LiftIgniter, I'll ask that Ingenieil come on camera.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just as a reminder to our audience, we do have at the bottom of this page a resource for you to ask questions. So we'll be able to answer those questions live later at the end of the segment, and ask those questions about startups, or ask those questions about LiftIgniter. And then as one final point, make sure that you keep watching the webinar, because as Jason hinted, we do have a special program at the very end where you might be able to get some GCP startup credits. So very cool. Ingenieil, thank you for joining us. And you are the founder of LiftIgniter. That's really awesome. Would you mind introducing yourself and maybe sharing what LiftIgniter does?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here, Nick. Pleasure to be here. So LiftIgniter is a machine learning personalization company. And the best way to think about that is, think of a site like YouTube, where every time you watch a video, a few videos are picked automatically for you to watch next. And most of you who've spent time on YouTube know how addicting it is. But what you may not realize is, behind the scenes there is this enormously powerful artificial intelligence software that is picking videos for you from a pool of billions of videos, and it's doing it for every single user that comes to the site. It's an enormously difficult problem, but once you do it right, if you can pick the right video that a user is interested in watching next, you will create that addictive experience, which means end users have a much more satisfying experience on YouTube, and it also means that they will spend less time on other sites. So it's a critical thing for the website owners to have, and it's an important component of the user experience. And the only way to make this possible at scale in this attention economy is to have intelligence behind the scenes, which is only possible through machine learning and more recent AI techniques. So that is what LiftIgniter tries to bring to the rest of the world, which may not be able to hire the same kind of engineers as a Google or a Facebook can, or build the kind of infrastructure that they can.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So essentially, you're taking the concept behind YouTube recommendations and all that, and then applying them to really all of your customers out there, right?
Exactly. So the concept of personalization has been around since the start of the internet. You had personalization companies even in '99. What has truly changed is, and we always knew that in order to do personalization, you need to build intelligence at scale. And what has changed recently is massive breakthroughs in machine learning, massive breakthroughs in cloud computing. I mean, the presence of cloud computing solutions and amazing infrastructure has made it possible for startups like us to actually build these solutions and make it available at a reasonable price to the rest of the world. And this is why the genesis of such solutions happened in companies like Google and Facebook, which had the absolute state-of-the-art in infrastructure, some of the best engineers, massive resources. But now it has come to a point with these waves of advances in machine learning and cloud computing that it can be made available to the rest of the world via startups like LiftIgniter.
That's really awesome, and it's so exciting that you guys are pretty much on the breaking edge of doing this, and it's really thanks to machine learning. So I guess some of the basic questions is how or when did you found LiftIgniter, and kind of why did you get into the space in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, so LiftIgniter actually has an interesting genesis story. So I was part of the Google research team that built out several of the major personalization systems at Google, including that of YouTube. So I got to see firsthand what a massive impact true real-time machine learning at scale can have on customer satisfaction, on business metrics for the website owners. And so I felt like this technology had to be made available at a price point to a reasonable price point for the rest of the world. And so this was about 4 years ago, and so basically that was the story. Like, that was the inspiration. Some of the breakthroughs that happened in companies inside Google, and we saw similar breakthroughs happening at Facebook. We felt like this needed to be made available to the rest of the world.
Cool. And then from a high level, how exactly does it work?
Yeah, so so there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, but what we do is we look at two kinds of data. We look at user activities on the site very, very carefully. And then we look at the kind of signals that you can extract out of the content itself, through NLP, through image features extraction, through like video analysis. And then taking all this data becomes very large very quickly.
Of course.
And what we need to do with this data is actually even more difficult. So there are three things that we need to do. We need to do sophisticated modeling in order to be able to guess what a complex creature like a human being might want next.
Yep.
We need to do this modeling at scale because, as we discussed, the data blows up really fast. Yep. And finally, the third piece is we need to do it really, really fast in the order of 100 milliseconds per visit. And these three things, scalability, complex modeling, and real time, they don't really go well with each other unless you have built you have access to fantastic infrastructure, fantastic mathematical algorithms. So we kind of put all that together. And what ends up happening is you have a truly dynamic experience on the website. So when a user comes, like a site like YouTube, they might be showing sports on the top row, but you might be interested in music right now. And within a few clicks, the algorithms have figured out you're in the mood for music. So when you go back to your homepage, the first row is now showing music. So that kind of intelligence that can dynamically personalize every element is possible only when you combine like really sophisticated modeling using user behavior and content at scale in real time.
I'm always fascinated with machine learning use cases because it seems like machine learning sometimes can solve everything. I mean, obviously it can't. So I just wanted to hear your opinion. What in your application has machine learning worked really well with? And then maybe what are some of the challenges that you've had with machine learning where machine learning might not be like the best use case?
Absolutely. So machine learning, if you can focus and narrow down a use case, and gather enough data for it, machine learning can be a great solution. And so it's funny. Like machine learning has there's so much there's so much buzz around machine learning now, but there are and it can infuse and improve almost every product, but it can be infused and every product, but it has to fit in natural grooves nicely. So for instance, there aren't like machine learning can't suddenly predict that a certain dress someone wore on on an Oscar night is going to resonate with a lot of users, which a human, which a marketer or someone who has domain expertise might have a lot of intuition for. So it's imperative that machine learning algorithms, which can crunch a lot of data really fast to complicated things, be paired with human intelligence, which can make these leaps through vast more experience and more sophisticated cognitive models that algorithms cannot do typically. So we are really, I would say, at the beginnings of where we are from a sophistication perspective, and so it still needs to be a big partnership between humans and machine learning to be truly driving value.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I find that machine learning can be a little bit challenging to get into, specifically for some of those reasons. And it's awesome that Google's kind of releasing more and more products like AutoML and stuff like that that can kind of meet the user halfway and not just provide an ML API, but kind of allow them to put some of their secret sauce, some of their customization on top of it. But you absolutely hit on on the correct point in that. In order to do machine learning, you have to have a whole bunch of data in order to train the model. But not only do you need the data, but you need to be able to have data that's clean, that's been sanitized, and so some of those processes have to be aided by people, by ETL processes, stuff like that. So
yeah. It's actually a lot of work to to get the integration right, because algorithms are very sensitive to feedback data, and so a lot of things have to fall into place before it can work. When it does work, it works like magic. But we're still, as I said, just scratching the surface, and there are like lots more to lot more things that can't be done by machine learning than that can be done.
Yep, cool. And is there a success story that you're able to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very common example of how we are used by our customers. So this is this is a site which has a lot of high-end fashion items, and we are personalizing a grid of products that are shown to a user. This grid chain is fully responsive. As the user navigates through the site, as they click on different items, within sub-second, like within actually 100 millisecond, when they revisit the grid after navigating the site for a little bit of time, it is completely changed to reflect the kind of mood they might be in, the kind of preferences that the algorithm has inferred the user might be in. And when you do that, you see the kind of results that you see here, like improvements in user engagement, the time they spend on the site by 50%, and dollars they spend on the site because they're finding the products they want by double-digit percentage improvements, which are huge.
Yeah, and I like your example of essentially a user initially goes to the site and they see all sorts of different items, dresses, shirts, purses, all that. But then when they start clicking on some purses, you can kind of infer that the user is maybe more searching for purses rather than other clothing items. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's important to do this in real time because you never really know who the user is, even if they've logged in. Which, by the way, 90% of the users are not logged in. And even if they're logged in, it might be their spouse or it might be their kids using it. So their mood right now cannot be inferred by 2 years old worth of purchasing data. So it has to react in real time. The best signal for what a user is going to do in the next 5 seconds is given by what they did in the last 5 seconds. And you have to build a truly real-time machine learning solution.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Cool. And are you able to walk through some of your architecture with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give you, give you a sense of the scale we are at, which necessitates like pretty sophisticated architecture. We're we're processing tens of billions of user activities per month, which we're
No small feat.
yeah, it is. It is. We used to joke like at some point we were processing more than 1 billion page views per engineer in our company. So very things that were absolutely not possible.
Yeah.
Like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So we are definitely leveraging all the latest technology in a very critical way, but we process tens of thousands of events per second. We score like millions of content per second to figure out the right the right match for a user. We have billions of signals that we analyze, and all of this requires like a really sophisticated architecture, and which I can describe in a second. So
yeah, let's do that.
So we're on GCP obviously, and we use a variety of pieces of their technology. This is a highly simplified diagram, just so that I can
More arrows.
yeah, there are a lot more pieces, a lot more arrows, but it just already shows how we critically use several pieces.
Yep.
So we have as I've said, probably the most common word I've used is real time. So we have lots of pieces to make as much of the processing in real time as possible. So for instance, we have a cluster, an auto-scaling cluster of front-end computing instances which receive a mass, this fire hose of events.
Yeah.
Then we process them through the Google Cloud PubSub message queue. And then behind the consumers of those message queue are these real-time jobs that are also on auto-scaling clusters. One thing we use here is to keep costs low, which is critical for startups, is we use instances which preemptible instances which are much more cheap, because our real-time jobs they require less strict guarantees because it's a statistical system. So if there is a little bit of loss of data, that's fine for the machine learning algorithm. So we can keep a flexible preemptible cluster running. All of that data goes into our data store, which is a core piece of our infrastructure, which supports hundreds of thousands of read writes per second, and that is built on a cluster of Google computing instances. We use a variety of cloud storage. We use BigQuery very critically. I personally think BigQuery is a fantastic piece of software. It has eliminated several quarters worth of development that we would have had to do otherwise in order to create real-time analytics.
Sure.
And it's a great tool for non-technical customers or non-technical members of our company to analyze data as well. And finally, from the machine learning side, we built a lot of the machine learning in-house, but we also use some deep learning APIs like for vision and NLP, for which Google has the state-of-the-art, the best APIs around, and at a very reasonable cost.
So I'm just a little bit curious. It looks like a lot of your machine learning happens in GCE rather than maybe like the cloud machine learning engine. So would you mind just adding some context of like why you went with one versus the other? Just curious.
Yeah, and some of it is historical. And as we will cover, we weren't originally on GCP. In fact, we started before Google Cloud was a big enterprise. And so we had to build a lot of our own machine learning. Some of it is because we do very custom machine learning solutions which are not available as free tools. But that said, we use a lot of, we use some ready-made APIs. We use a lot of the tools like TensorFlow and a variety of some other open source. And I think as we move ahead, we're going to use way more of the machine learning tools at Google. And in fact, I think this might be a nice segue to like the story behind us moving into GCP.
Yeah.
Like one of the reasons we are excited about Google Cloud, we made the transition to Google Cloud, is having been at Google, I know firsthand what fantastic infrastructure they have, but also that they are some of the leaders. They have some of the best machine learning. They're like by far, I think, the best machine learning technology in the world. And we want to have a piece of that. We are a machine learning company. We don't want to, compromise on that. And so we absolutely believe, and we are very excited to try some of the new hardware, some of the new open source, some of the new services that Google Cloud is releasing.
Cool. Yeah, it's always interesting hearing the advancements that Google's coming out with, specifically around machine learning and big data. I mean, Cloud Next, which happened recently, I feel like maybe a quarter of the announcements had machine learning because it seems like machine learning is coming to every single product that we have, and it just makes sense. So that's really interesting. I'm a little bit curious about your story from migrating from another cloud provider onto GCP. How was the migration and any kind of lessons learned and stuff?
Yeah, so we started LiftIgniter about 4 years ago, and Google Cloud was, it was in a much more restricted form then, and major provider was AWS, and it was not a difficult choice at that point. And then fast forward to sometime early last year, we were compelled by a lot of the offerings. First of all, we were very excited that Google was taking the cloud business seriously because, for a variety of reasons, I think it makes a lot of sense. They have, some of the best infrastructure. It's some insane infrastructure internally at Google, and making that available to the rest of the world is an idea that excites me, appeals to me. And to some extent, LiftIgniter had that same spirit of taking, and so. So we were compelled to take a very close look. And then, and there were a few reasons that convinced us that the migration, even though the migration is going to be very painful for startups, it still makes sense. And that's a big decision coming from like a Series A level company to make. And then, so the main thing was, the bet on machine learning, and that Google is going to remain the leader, and they're going to expose some of the best technology, machine learning technology on cloud. The second thing was, we were very impressed by the people we interacted with and their commitment to helping startups. And startups need money, startups need great access to great technology, but another thing they really would like is marketing exposure.
Sure.
And it's events like this, for instance. Google has been phenomenal. Like, we've had a ton of exposure through blogs, through conferences, through events like this, at getting our message out. So that was very, very compelling for us, and that was something we were willing to take a hit on engineering productivity for a few months doing the migration for. There were a few other business reasons. Like, a lot of our customers are e-commerce customers, and they're not really comfortable being with vendors that are completely hosted on AWS, being for obvious reasons. And then a few other things, like obviously the infrastructure on certain pieces was more exciting. The pricing was friendlier in many ways. And so all of these reasons together, we just made a call. And I think we're very glad that we actually made that decision.
Cool. Well, hats off to Jason and team. I mean, the startup program is phenomenal, working with customers and everything. So that's really awesome. Can you share some of the maybe things that LiftIgniter is going to be coming out with in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, when we initially started, I'm a machine learning, PhD by, in my background. It was all about like machine learning. Let's build the best algorithms. What we have realized is, there are limitations of the algorithms. There are things that a human does much better, and in order to build a full-fledged product, we need to kind of balance those two things. So we have this concept of augmented intelligence. So we have these machine learning algorithms, but working for you, working as tools that marketers can use. In the same, much is in the same way that Google Cloud is making tools available rather than solutions to replace human beings. So that is our focus, and we're coming up with a lot of tools for technical as well as non-technical people to leverage the sophisticated machine learning, use the insights from them, use them as tools to achieve their ends. So that's one of the most exciting things we have on our roadmap.
That's cool. Yeah, that's awesome. And then I guess last question for you before we jump into some of the Q&A is, how do people get in touch with LiftIgniter? I've heard that you're looking for maybe some new people to join the team, and obviously looking for customers. So
yeah, we have so if you want to test the product, just shoot us an email at info@LiftIgniter. We will get on a call with you right away. We have a lot of information on the website as well. And we're obviously, looking for amazing machine learning, back-end, front-end engineers, marketing, as well as non-technical folks on the sales and marketing site. So just drop us a note at jobs@LiftIgniter, and we'll get back to you.
Cool. Well, Engineer, thank you so much for spending the time with us. We're going to take a quick break for all of the questions that have been submitted so we can compile them into one slide. And then we're going to have you and Jason back to kind of go over some of those answers. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Nick.
All right, everyone, welcome back. Again, Jason Scott, Startup Program Lead on the West Coast here at Google Cloud, and we have Indranil here, founder of LiftIgniter, and we're back for a few questions. So you want to just kick it off?
Sure, absolutely.
Awesome. So first question we have, so now that LiftIgniter has been on GCP for a while, are there some things you wish you had known from the beginning?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think definitely, we received a lot of help from the Google team while migrating, but there were a few things we just could have planned better during migration. So anyone who's planning to migrate from, let's say, AWS or some other cloud provider to GCP, it's good to probably dive down into some of the technologies which may look similar. For instance, Kinesis, which is a message queue on AWS, versus Google Cloud PubSub. There are some subtle differences that can change, how much money it costs you, change how much, what kind of throughput you're achieving. So both on the technical as well as expense side, you might want to redo your code in a certain way in order to best use the new technology that you're migrating to. So there were, so some of the things we thought were straightforward may not be, so it's good to take a closer look while doing the migration. And that was the theme behind like several pieces, like for instance, the streaming jobs as well. When we went from streaming jobs, which were mostly it was managed by us, to like cloud data flow, there were some differences which were a pleasant surprise, and there were some others which were unexpected, and we had to kind of maneuver. But if we had just known a few more details in advance, it would have helped with a smoother transition.
Got it. Well, you made it, which is also great.
Yeah.
Second question that came from the audience, any words of wisdom, I guess, aside from the one that you just mentioned, for other aspiring startups and founders out there?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of wisdom out there. I don't think, so I would strongly recommend looking at Y Combinator's content. We actually went through Y Combinator, and if you are a first-time founder, I would say that's one of the best places. You look up their startup school advice, look at their course notes, and I would strongly recommend going through that program as well. But beyond that, startups are exhilarating. It's like you're gonna live life in a more intense way, and so brace for it, but it's going to be worth it.
Got it. Awesome. Third, and you mentioned the challenges of migration already, but what are some of the benefits and challenges, some of the other benefits and challenges that LiftIgniter faced on GCP throughout your journey?
Yeah, so the benefits, again, I kind of touched upon these issues, like the pricing is much friendlier. It helps us reduce planning and some extra overhead. It's easier to sell to some of our customers, again, the e-commerce customers. Some of the tools are just a little bit more developer friendly. I keep hearing this from a lot of our developers, like the permission system is a little more friendly. the Google Cloud PubSub, it has a lot of in Cloud Data Flow. There are very well designed services which reduces the coding complexity. So, there have been like innumerable little things like that, which we really like. And then of course, some big things was like BigQuery, which is phenomenal piece of it's a product infrastructure. It has simplified a lot of our product, and it has cut down our dev time by several months. Totally worth the price. And some of the auto scaling logic, etc., which has also worked pretty well for us. And so that was some of the benefits. The challenges, again, some more better research before doing the migration could have helped us create a better plan for migration. And then the other thing is, Google Cloud has some fantastic features, but it's also there are some rough edges, like not many, but some. Like for instance, the load balancer went down a few weeks ago, and then there were, I think, some minor bits and pieces. Like there's just a little bit more monitoring, less monitoring metrics that are available, which is kind of important for us because we have strong SLAs with our customers. Again, these aren't showstoppers. These are all things you can work around. And I'm sure these will improve very quickly given the pace at which Google Cloud has improved over the last few years.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for being candid. Those. I guess the last question is one that I can take. It says, if I'm a startup, how do I get engaged with Google? I think with that, I would love to let everyone know that as a viewer or as a listener to this, you're all eligible to join our startup program at our start tier, which is kind of our early stage tier for our program. That includes $3,000 in cloud credits and Firebase credits, as well as a lot of other benefits, G Suite if you're on that, as well as the technical support that we mentioned earlier as well. With that, I would like everyone to stay tuned for our next session, which is Google Sheets tips and tricks to boost productivity, something I definitely will also tune into, coming to you live from New York. And with that, thank you, Indranil, for coming. Thank you to everyone and for listening in, and we'll see you next time.